Healing the divide between the police and the community. This is a Columbus on the Record special. I'm Mike Thompson. This week we take a step back and look at the wide divide between police and the community, something that has come into sharp focus over the past year or so. Our guests are the Reverend Jeffrey P. Key, a Columbus native and pastor of the New Faith Baptist Church, Officer Angel Tucker, a native of Toledo, now with the Oregon, Ohio Police Department, and Kim Jacobs, former Columbus Police Chief. We begin with a discussion about the state of the relationship between Columbus Police and its residents.
We need to be looking right here at this police department here because it has a long history of treating people inhumane, and officers, even inside of the Columbus Police Department, they were looking for a prophetic voice. So they came to the church and said, we need some help because we're dealing with retaliation. The culture of policing in this city is a plantation, and we see too often the abusive hand of policing and trying to have a more equitable police department.
Chief Jacobs, you were with the Columbus Police Division of Police for a very long time. You led the police division for a number of years. How would you characterize the divide right now?
That is one of those things that we do agree on, that bad policing and bad cops are things that good cops don't want around. But I do believe that there is a divide. We've done a lot, in my opinion, to try to reduce that. Dialogue, in my opinion, is one of the best ways. We sit down together and discuss our points of view and perspectives, and then try to come up with some understanding of each other, knowledge about the concerns, fears, distrust, all of those things. The Columbus Police Foundation has allowed more than 350 officers to go to Washington, D.C. to look at the Holocaust Museum and the African American Museum to study the past very fraught relationship between our communities and our police.
Officer Tucker, Angel Tucker, you're an officer, also African American. How would you characterize the divide? Is it deeper than it was when you started on the job?
My divide, like the Reverend, started much earlier than my experience as a police officer. I grew up in the inner city, and I had this call that I wanted to serve early. But I muted that call because you didn't do that where I was from. I grew up in a community surrounded by gangs and drugs and stuff like that. Last thing you better mention is that you either want to serve in the military or you want to be a first responder. But still, inherently, as a kid, you like the police. I used to wave at the police when they would go by and they would give me the middle finger. I remember being a teenager, I would, like every teenage boy, you want to walk down the street to visit a young lady, and I would constantly get harassed by the police. Even though my mother, who started block watching in that area, was the block watch captain, they just used to always harass me, throw me up against the car, empty out my pockets. One time they even pulled my pants down in front of everybody. It was just an embarrassing situation. Yet still, I felt that call to serve. Now, don't get me wrong, there were some good officers that I encountered along the way. What I'm saying is that the divide, to me, I haven't seen growth in the divide as far as bringing us together. I haven't seen a close in that gap from the time I was a youth up until the 10 years that I've currently been a police officer. And if I can piggyback, I think the chief and the Reverend were absolutely correct in what they were saying. If I could piggyback on that, I think one of the biggest things as law enforcement we should do is what I suggested when George Floyd happened, is we need to take ownership and accountability for our part in this. We've never really told the community, hey, we know that things are wrong and that there are some bad ones, and we really do want to help take ownership of it. And on top of taking ownership, I think we should invite the community to help us not only take ownership in it, but to help us figure out what we're going to do to correct it. I know we're doing it in some areas, but a lot of times the public has no clue into how we are trained. I teach in the Citizens Police Academy, so initially I did cultural diversity, but now I just teach them the culture of police so they know why we do some of the things we do. Also train in tactical communication, where I have both community members and first responders in the training together. Because what I want to know is if our community approves of our training, that means it's most likely good. If they don't approve of it, then why are we wasting money using it if it's not going to reflect with our community?
Chief Jacobs, I want to go back to what Reverend Key had said, and he used some pretty strong language there. He used the term plantation. I want to get your reaction to that, but also wonder, has the police establishment, the Columbus Police in particular, been too slow to address this, in your opinion?
I don't believe so, no. Under Mayor Coleman and Safety Director Mitchell Brown, we made a lot of strides, in my opinion, to establish core values that meant for respect for all of our community. We emphasized recruiting and adding to our diversity. We added diversity inclusion liaisons during my tenure. We did dialogues, we did meetings with the community. We went to their meetings and talked to them. We've changed a lot of different practices. There was a huge emphasis on trying to improve community relations and make sure that things were being done equitably. And in those cases where we found that we needed to improve our training, we tried to do that as well. We've been CALEA accredited for a very long time. They required ethics training and bias training, but we increased the frequency in which that was done, as not, CALEA said so often, but we did it more frequently than that.
Reverend Key.
We implemented a lot of different changes to address those kinds of things.
Reverend Key, looking at some of the causes of the divide, one thing that's been mentioned often is that there is over-policing in low-income neighborhoods where there are a lot of people of color who live there. But on the other hand, there's a lot of crime in those areas, and people who live in those neighborhoods want police there to protect themselves, and a lot of African Americans have been victims of crime, also have been perpetrators of crime. What is the proper level, in your mind, of policing in neighborhoods where a lot of people of color live?
Well, certainly, I think no one really wants crime in their community, but when you are being racially profiled, when you are a citizen of a particular community and you have been identified to be a problem because of systemic racism that is in the police department, and I respect what Chief Jacobs expressed, but the reality is that there were many lawsuits, not many, but there was an Eric Moore lawsuit under her watch. There was a lawsuit with an African-American, Carl Shaw, who expressed that this culture was retaliatory under Chief Jacobs in terms of unfair in regards to discipline. All of these things are horrendous cataclysms that have not been adequately addressed. And certainly if a person is committing a crime, I think we all would agree that we do not want crime in our community. You need to render a certain level of whatever it takes, a level 1, level 2. But we see clearly so many. I think there's no answer for particularly unarmed African American males that we see over and over again, just totally unarmed, who have been ambushed and killed for no apparent reason. I would like to hear an answer to that, but I think there must be an admission before we can really have a real good dialogue. I would call it the AAA response. First of all, we have to just clearly acknowledge it is a problem. It's been a problem under Kim Jacobs' watch. It's been a problem under Mitch Brown's watch. As a matter of fact, the Columbus Police Department has become chronically worse in terms of becoming more white. I'll say this, I think this is very alarming that we have about 1,900 police officers on the Columbus Police Department, and 20-something of them who were African Americans came and wanted us to honor their anonymity. But look at the percentage of that. You only have less than 200, 100 and some police officers who are Black. 20 of them came to the religious community and said, we need some help because this leadership is really out of control. At that time, Chief Jacobs was the chief of the police department. But we have to acknowledge that it is a problem. That's number one. Then the second thing we had to do, we had to address what is the problem. Then point number 3, we have to deal with the attitudes of those who try to rationalize it's not a problem Fourthly, we have to make adjustments to accept that it is a problem. And finally, we have to amend by addressing how to correct the problem. But until we really acknowledge that African Americans have been harassed, victims of excessive force, been intimidated, and particularly if officers in the Columbus Police Department are dealing with this from their own colleagues and comrades, think about what the citizens are dealing with this widespread malady of injustice.
I want to talk to the diversity aspect in a moment, but Chief Jacobs, I want to give you a chance to respond there up to what the Reverend Key said there about your leadership and what the Columbus Division of Police has done over the past recent years, anyway.
Well, I would say that the facts of all of these cases are extremely important. We have investigations, they're public records. I love living in Ohio for that particular reason, and I loved working in Ohio for that particular reason. Transparency is one of the things that I truly believe in. So the facts of all of the cases are extremely important, but investigations are also important because we don't know everything that happened until we've created those things. And now there are a multitude of ways in which those investigations can happen. And there is a EEO investigator in the Director of Public Safety's office as well. So those things are addressed. Lawsuits are addressed. They are defended by the City of Columbus City Attorney's Office. And I'm not afraid of what all of those investigations say with regard to my particular actions. But I will say one thing, that employee relations are extremely important to me. I had multitudes of what I called kitchen cabinet type of meetings. I brought a lot of different people into my office and said, what's going on? These were officers, sergeants, lieutenants. I'm trying to hear from them instead of just the upper level executive staff people, and try to find out what it was that they need. Obviously, in a workforce of not just the 1,900 officers, but another 400 civilians, we have a lot of things going on. It's important to me that all of our employees feel valued, listened to, and that their rights are protected. My experience as a woman in a male-dominated organization was different, perhaps, from a lot of different people. And I certainly can't speak from the arena of being a Black person in my organization. I know that some of them have had a difficult ride, but I do believe that the division has tried to accomplish investigations that will come to the information that we need to know to make a decision about that outcome. And sometimes the proof is there and sometimes the proof is not. But it is important to have good and really close employee relationships, because I agree that if you feel good about yourself, you're going to go out there and do good work for the community. And if you don't, if you feel your organization is not supportive, then that might be impinged upon. But I agree. We need to do as much as we possibly can to make every employee feel valued and investigate their complaints. And now there are and have always been different places that they can go to address those complaints.
Officer Angel Tucker, you are the first African-American police officer in Oregon, Ohio. Diversity is a problem in police ranks. The city of Columbus is 28% African-American, but the Division of Police is only 10% African-American. What can be done to increase the number of people of color on the police force?
So other than your basic recruitment efforts, I would say exactly what I said the first time and exactly what the Reverend said, an acknowledgement. There has to be an acknowledgement that there is some wrongdoing and there are some missteps on the part of not only law enforcement, but the system in general. And like the chief said, instead of just listening to upper rank and file, really listen to your troops that are on the ground. I mean, both in civilian world and in the first responder world. And then we have to dive into another area. How traumatized are our under-resourced communities, as well as some of our first responders? And trauma is an area that a lot of us don't like to talk about with everything that's going on, drugs, gangs, violence, fires, car crashes, shootings. There's a lot of trauma there too that could create PTSD and certain things like that. So I call it a clash of the conditions. So with a lack of understanding not only a culture and a race, now you're not understanding a mental health. And so when you look at all those things that both sides deal with and you see, oh, wow, they both have so much in common, I think us acknowledgement and then showing the commonalities that we all have and coming together under those guises of those commonalities, I think that will, for me, it unlocked that mute button that was in my head of that call to serve. And once I unlocked the mute button for that call to serve, I kind of had a clear path how to unlock other people's mute button.
All right, we're going to unlock Claire Roth's mute button right now. She is our afternoon host on 89.7 NPR News, and she is fielding questions from our audience. Claire, it's all yours.
Mary has a question for the group. She writes, do you believe the recent efforts to reimagine public safety with hearings to get feedback from the community will affect real change here in Columbus? How will we recognize and measure improvement?
Reverend Key, I'll let you have that one.
We can do things in theory, but sometimes it's not really played out in reality. What I don't like is when something is an ongoing process, but it's not an ongoing progress. So many times we will window dress and say we have something there, but really things do not change in terms of the systemic evil. So we can keep having dialogues and keep having support systems and no one there to support the system, but we need to be really intentional and make sure that we are moving forward. I've been a part of something called the 7 Expectations. We're 2 years and maybe 3 months in, and we're just at 2 of the expectations. So I'm just saying that if you're not careful, it can be some progress, little progress, but sometimes it's an ongoing process, but there's very little progress.
Chief Jacobs, I want to talk about you talked a lot about training and having dialogues, but the culture of policing. There is a culture of us against them in the police that whether there's too many guns on the street and police officers are always worried that somebody's going to pull a gun on them, or there's an us against them mentality, I believe, in the police and to a large extent. And then also, how they treat people of color, people from a lower socioeconomic background. How do we improve the culture of policing so it's more cooperative, more community-minded, more understanding of folks that don't look like those officers, don't come from the same backgrounds as those officers?
I do believe that us against them thing has existed for many years. I believe that it's diminishing because we have been encouraging community engagement again for the last 10, 15 years in CPD, getting out of your cruiser, going around and talking to people at recreation centers, libraries, wherever you might find community members, and just talking to them. With the dialogues that we did, we also tried to engage with them. There is a certain amount of what I consider to be patriarchal feeling in policing that, that we had to take care of everyone, but that was kind of like at the risk of not listening to anyone as well. But I would say that in the last, 10 years or so, we've been paying attention to what our community is saying. Some of those things can't happen overnight, and as much as we wish that we could change things for the better immediately, it is not always possible to change that quickly. But there are some things that we can change very quickly through policy and say you can't do this anymore, and that has been done. We've changed an awful lot of rules. We've updated them to be more responsive to some of our community concerns. And I do believe that officers today are better than they've ever been. When I joined the department in 1979, there was a definite us against them, and there was I can do whatever I want to do attitude sometimes with the use of force. But with all of those technology improvements that we have, with the training improvements we have, with the leadership improvements that we've seen, we've been able to hold officers more accountable because we have that information now that we didn't have in the past. The officers of today didn't grow up in that period of time where trust in the police was kind of implicit almost. Now it's more of a distrust of the police until proven otherwise at times. And that's okay. I think officers that take the oath understand that they are held to a higher standard, and they should be. And that the things that they do that other citizens do just won't pass muster. So I do believe that they understand that there's transparency and accountability that is extremely important to our community, and they're willing to continue to work in those conditions.
We've gotten quite a few questions from our audience. We want to return to Claire Roth with another question.
And as we're talking about legal response, Sonia has a question about qualified immunity. That's the legal principle that grants police officers protection from certain civil suits. Her question for Kim Jacobs: do you believe abolishing qualified immunity would ensure bad actors are brought to justice? Could it serve as a strong deterrent to abusing police powers?
Former Chief Kim Jacobs, qualified immunity.
Yeah, I believe that the Supreme Court just heard a case on qualified immunity and decided not to address that at this point in time, or to take it away. And it's not just police officers that it applies to. It applies to government officials. So boards of education, a lot of public officials have qualified immunity. And don't think that doesn't allow police departments and cities to hold their own officers accountable. That's really about lawsuits and damages that could be caused. And if you're making a decision in the line of your work that is discretionary, allowed by policy, and has never been told that it's against policy or against somebody's constitutional rights, then that's what the immunity is about. If there was a clearly negative thing that happens that is something an officer should know, then they don't have qualified immunity. They have to be listened to and go to court to determine what type of liability they might have. But it's one of those really big things. It's a federal thing. It's not a local decision. And there are reasons why it exists, but I will make this point again. That doesn't stop police agencies and mayors and other organization leads to not hold the officers that have done a bad act accountable.
Reverend Key, I want to get your take on this. There's been a lot of other things that have been said in the past few moments. Qualified immunity, it is a high bar because of the nature of the work that police officers do, that grand juries face, whether or not to indict an officer who is charged with excessive force or using deadly force inappropriately. What do you think should be done with regards to the legal system? Not necessarily the policy system and how the division of police works, but whether or not an officer should face criminal charges.
Absolutely. We've had too many officers again and again where we see the same scenario where they walk away from murdering and killing. And just think about Columbus. We're dealing now, if the truth were told, we're dealing with an execution of one officer. If the record is correct and the family is correct, that here is a person, Casey Goodson Jr., who has been shot in the back 6 times. 6 times. That's an execution. Then you have, on the other hand, here's Andre Hill by an officer, Adam Coy. Because he cannot see his other hand, he just flats out murders him. Now, I give respect to the fact that, he didn't, we want to look at the rendering aid, but look at this. This is, look how blatant and gross, the kind of injustice is.
Reverend Jeffrey Key, we've lost his video. We apologize for that. Reverend, just a little housekeeping, Reverend. If you could check your video settings on your phone, I think that's what might be the problem there. But we appreciate your words, and they are strong words indeed. Officer Tucker, Angel Tucker, qualified immunity. Do you think it's too high a bar that grand juries face when trying to decide whether there is probable cause to charge a police officer with a crime using deadly force?
I got to be honest with you. Qualified immunity is not something that I have extensively researched or read upon. When it comes to the career path I chose, I find that I'm constantly reading and researching. So there's no way to get to it all. I would not feel comfortable giving an opinion on what qualified immunity truly means because I have not truly examined it.
Just let me ask you this in general. Because police officers are often faced with dangerous situations, should you be afforded greater legal protection because of that? That your judgment should be you should have a sort of get the more of the benefit of the doubt than an average person does because of your line of work when using deadly force.
Well, like anybody in a profession, anyone in a profession is going to get the benefit of the doubt based on their level of professionalism and their level of knowledge in that field, as well as training and years on the job. So I think in some sense, yes, but in some sense, that should hold us at a higher level. I mean, if we have a higher skill set, a higher level of training, I think that we should be expected to not only make the best decision in that moment, but also have the abilities to accurately process all this information at a higher rate than the average civilian. So that's kind of a catch-22 question, because yes, do I think we should get a benefit of the doubt if everything lines up? Yes. But if everything doesn't line up, if we're trying to cover our own butts and we really didn't do it right, and then we should be not only given the benefit of the doubt when we do it right, but we should be held to a higher standard when we do it wrong.
That is Columbus on the Record for this week. We urge you to continue the conversation online. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, and you can access all of that at our website, wosu.org. For our crew and for our panel, I'm Mike Thompson. Have a good week.